Okay, looks like we are live. Welcome everybody to Brass Tacks Hard Facts Live, our Wednesday night offering. Tonight we have a special treat. We have Brian Brush and Eric Tollund. We're going to be talking about nozzle evaluations, going over a couple of our Brass Tacks episodes. We get a lot of questions. We get a lot of questions on how they're done, points, tactics, whatnot. So we've got some good stuff tonight. It's going to be great. So again, my name is Chris Martin. I'm with our Safe Fleet FEI group, and Elkhart Brass is a big part of getting our Brass Tack series out. And we also have Jerry Herbst. I'm going to throw it to him for a minute.
Welcome back, everybody. Jerry Herbst from Elkhart Brass, part of Safe Fleet. I'm really proud to have these guys on tonight. They're really good friends. But more importantly, they're going to share some background. They together worked on a study when they were in West Metro that is one of the go-to resources to this day that I recommend because it was so comprehensive. So we're going to go deep into that, and then how things have evolved since then. This is a subject matter that was relevant then and is even more so now. And it'll be interesting for you to hear their story about how they've evolved from where they were when they did the first one to what they're doing now. So we're happy to have them on. I'll turn it over to Brian, and you can give yourself a little bio, and then give it off to Eric.
Man, it's pretty cool to be on here with Eric. I mean, that was looking back 16 years ago that we started working on this project. He and I got to work together, 18 years ago, I guess, to start. So pretty cool to go back in time with Eric and talk about that nozzle study and how much we've learned since then, and how much people have learned about all the equipment and everything. But man, even back to then, Elkhart and Sure Sales out there in Denver was just such awesome supporters of us getting into the weeds on projects and demo and quitting it and trying to find things out. So it's pretty amazing to still be a part of this, this time later.
Awesome. Thanks, man. How about you, Eric?
Yeah, I'm honored to be here. Like I was saying when we were chatting before we got started, man, what a cool thing to go back and revisit something that we did that 15, 16 years ago. Reading through it, just thinking about all that work and everything we put into that. What a cool experience. And it's something that I'm excited to talk about because I'm kind of doing it almost again in Denver in a similar way. And, it's a neat thing because when you're excited about something like this, you get to do something like this. It's an enjoyable thing that you get to do. So yeah, I'm pumped. I'm excited to get to talk about some of this stuff. And I know some of my guys at the firehouse are listening, so we should be getting some interesting questions, I'm sure.
Yeah, Station 23, the House of Flamingos in Denver. So anyway, before we get kicked off, thanks again, everybody tuning in. We had a lot of people last week either hashtagged Elkhart Brass or took a screen grab of you guys watching it in the firehouse, put it on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. Man, do it. Show us the love. We'll share it. We'll give you a shout out. It's pretty cool to see everybody sitting around the firehouse watching this stuff. If you miss it, if you want to show it to somebody, maybe on C shift, because it's always the C shifters. If you catch a run, we do post this up on our YouTube page. It'll be on YouTube within 24 hours. So you can go back and check it out later. So anyway, yeah, rolling back the clock a little bit. So Brian and Eric both worked together in West Metro, Colorado, a suburb of Denver. And in, 2005, there was a a Fire Nuggets article written by these guys about their journey, if you will, and what they found when they did their nozzle eval. So right now it seems to be kind of a hot topic of, people looking at hose and nozzle combinations. We like to joke that engine's cool again, but to all four of us on the screen here, engine's always been cool, right back to when we first got on the job. So these guys are going to go a little deep about maybe some of the experiences they learned and some pointers. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them up. We'll try to get to them, and we'll throw up a couple of the Brass Tacks clips. So anyway, Brian, you want to get us rolling?
Yeah, Eric and I, when we started working together, I came from the West Coast. I was born and raised in California in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I kind of had a connection to San Francisco fire, Oakland fire. And I do remember the Tracy Toomey's death, the line of duty death out there in Oakland. And as we started working together, Tollund and I, trying to network with other firefighters and knowing fire nuggets, we came into contact with Jay Camella, and he was just an incredible resource. He, not just for his background on their study that they did at Oakland in regards to flows, but just even hands-on technique and such. So really the root of our study was that original Oakland study and Jay's work. And we just kind of moved forward from there, wanted to bring it to our department. At that time, West Metro was in auto fogs, very much the stuff that we look back on, the inconsistency. And Eric will kind of talk about it, but I think that there was a lost generation in the fire service in the sense that we didn't have flow meters for a long period of time. When the fog was introduced to the fire service, it was pre a lot of technology. And with that, you took away the technology, and you could pedo a smoothbore, you can't pedo a fog. So we went probably 30, 40 years in a lot of the fire service, especially a lot of suburban fire service, with the fog nozzle, not knowing what we were truly flowing. And it wasn't until, fortunately at West Metro at the time, the rigs had onboard flow meters, and we were able to identify that what we were pumping wasn't, or what we thought we were pumping wasn't matching up with what was leaving the nozzle. And we kind of wanted to dive into it, and Jay was a tremendous resource for us there. So I don't know, you want to talk a little bit about what you rallied around there?
Yeah, you and I were both looking back on it. We were young, gung-ho firefighters that I think resonates with a lot of the people probably listening right now, that just you felt like this hunger to make something change, to get better, to improve what we're doing. And we were so lucky and blessed to have had some of the mentors that we had, both within our job and then also outside the job. And like Jay, for example, Jay Camella, was really the man that kind of helped lead us down that path. And, things just kind of fell in the right place at the right time. We were able to kind of really take a deep look at what we were doing and be able to start to understand the inefficiencies tied together with the efficiencies, and then build upon that. And in the end, came out with what I think was a pretty good nozzle package that provided a more simple, more efficient water delivery system for the department as a whole.
So how about this? What was the Instigator, right? So I think we talked about this before we got on. A lot of people now just want to kind of do a nozzle eval because everybody's kind of doing one. It's kind of a hot thing. So back in the mid to early 2000s, what was it that was a light bulb between you guys as young guys on the job that said, hey man, we got to dig into this and put something together? What was the catalyst here?
I don't know, Brush, maybe say something else, but I think, we were both traveling and going to classes. We were reading the articles. We were in the books. It was a great time to be a student of the fire service. And there was a lot of good information out there. I think we just happened to be the ones really picking up on it and kind of analyzing what we were doing. Like Brush said, we were in SM20 automatic fogs and started to really question what we were doing, and found that we were in some cases severely under pumping or underflowing what we thought we were doing. And that we both kind of had the light bulb went off for both of us of like, oh, we need to do something about this. And what can we do here to make a change? Brush, what do you got to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I was I was at one. Part of it was you and I starting to work together. You know, like we were once we came together, we were eager, and we were with the busy crew and an active crew. We got to get out and just do a lot of work. I was starting to study for engineer and acting engineer, and I remember checking out the rig, and we had every single kind of nozzle. I mean, we had the automatics, we had break aparts with a fixed gallonage fog, we had the select gallonage, we had stack tips. I mean, it was just a yard sale of equipment. And so it kind of started off with like, hey, what do these things do? Because our pump charts are only really kind of saying pump at 150 and bake at 350. So we wanted to, I wasn't satisfied with that. I wanted to learn a little bit more about it. Tollund, obviously, you know, had been talking with people using the 15/16. We wanted to explore that because we had a 15/16 integrated in our break aparts. But me being from the West Coast, I wanted to bring in the 7/8. So it was just kind of a jam session. I will say, man, it wasn't just that. It was a lot of good things were coming together. We had a very supportive battalion chief at the time. We had a very supportive officer at the time. We had a hungry crew. We were lucky to be going to quite a few fires at the time. And then the real deal was we, at that time, man, that part of the district was just getting torn down and demolished for urban development. And we had a lot of acquired structures. We had a hotel, a 2-story hotel that we burned in for an entire recruit class. Ben Schultz was in that recruit class. So we were putting nozzles in firefighters' hands day in and day out, doing fire attacks. So our nozzle study, we did the flow testing, we did the street testing, but then we put in a lot of burns and got to see a lot of different things. I mean, it was the whole, this thing won't hydraulically ventilate was really, really handled quickly when we're doing burn after burn. And the live burn experience was huge. I think it was kind of the introduction to the water mapping for us. You know, we didn't know what we were seeing then. We didn't have the terminology for it, but I mean, we were getting some pretty quick changes in these live fire conditions with the smooth bore and very, very little smoke disruption. And it was, those were the things that were changing people's minds. They didn't want to listen to Tollund and I, but once we started showing them the flow meters and we started showing them the fire progress we were making with these nozzles, it was really a big change. What's funny is at the time they went with the 15/16 nozzle. All of our guys preferred the 7/8. And then I heard as recently as just probably 6 months ago that they've decided to go with the 7/8. I think probably pretty funny for you to be a part of that change for them to go back on that. But I know you're pushing for the 15/16 at Denver, so.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm pushing for it, but there's a long-standing tradition of a 15/16 department that some things just don't change.
You know, you brought up something interesting. You were young and hard chargers, but your approach was validated. It was endorsed by a good boss and a battalion chief. So, you know, who you have on this eval group is real important, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, the district chief at the time, Chief Vansteel, he kind of wanted to call us out a little bit. So it was a surprise. I think we might have been out of town, and he ended up taking probably 8 companies down to the drill ground and just had them show up. He said, deploy a line, pump it as if you're making fire attacks. So show up, stretch a hose line to the door, charge it. Tell me what you're pumping it at and tell me what you think your flow rate is. And when he came back from that, he was shocked. You know, we had guys flowing anywhere from pump discharge pressure from anywhere from 90 to 200. And their estimates as far as their GPM was anywhere from 200 to 150. And we heard a lot of this, well, we're going to start them off low so they can get the line into place, and then we'll give them more pressure if they want. But as you guys know, man, there's almost never a nozzleman that's kind of working in that's trying to adjust his flow by the pump discharge pressure. And I think that was really eye-opening for the chief when he realized that there was just that big of a range and he didn't know what was really working at the pump panel, and he knew that the control wasn't in the hands of the nozzle firefighter. So
right. So I guess maybe, you know, I'm hearing that the lesson there is it's not so much about your opinion of what's going on is adding a couple senses for third parties to actually see it. And I think it's widespread in evals now. You may be presenting to people that have lost touch with that position, or haven't been in that position in quite a while, or in the street in quite a while. So that epiphany, you've got to find ways on an eval committee to get to that epiphany at all levels. And the more senses you can add to that, the better. They need to see it. They need to hear people talking about it.
Yeah, and I think too, I think we can all relate that there's a certain number of our departments, wherever we are, that really don't care. That water comes out, and that's plenty good. However, there's a certain amount that need to care, and then can make those changes and push to hopefully make that package more effective in that water delivery. I was looking through our the nozzle study, the binder that we put together, and one of the numbers that stood out was the average flow of all the engines across the job there at West Metro at the time was 128 GPM. That was the average initial flow out of an 1.75" hand line. And the thing is, nobody was like, yeah, we're definitely flowing under 150. Most guys thought they were flowing plenty. But it's that thing of where you just don't know what you flow until you really take a look at it and examine it.
Right. And that's such a reality, because the bottom line is sooner or later, everybody's fires are going out. Whether it's done, efficiently, or you're approaching it effectively, is something else entirely. And I think and I guess you guys must have run into it too. That's where you hit this apathy sometimes, with people that have hit the comfort zone in their career, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know what it's like. The guy sits there like this and saying, I've been pumping that line at that for 20 years, kid. Now you're going to tell me I'm doing it wrong.
Right.
Well, no, but let's find out what's really flowing out of it, Did you guys tell me this? And I don't want to bring you to the end of it, but let's talk about the byproduct. Was there a visible difference in your attack capability once you made changes?
I think it's funny. You look back, and I don't know. I know Dennis Laguerre will talk about it, how they reduced their greater alarms and those types of things. I don't know that we could technically quantify it. And I talked with Chris, and I was talking with E about this too. The nozzle evaluation, certainly that was what we were focusing on, but the bigger picture, and now having the maturity and the time, and it was an organizational education. So regardless of whether our fires were going out fast or anything like that, our pump chart was better. Our members had a better understanding. Our standpipe kits got better before. Once we went through this pain and hardship and change transition, man, everything else went a whole lot faster. Our went as far as our 2.5-inch package, because they had a better hydraulic understanding and a better work of the equipment. It was like the dominoes just started falling. And I don't know, it sure seemed like what took us a year to do with the initial part, from there, everything just started. The engineers academies got better. Everything just kind of, because we had a better base understanding, all those other things came into greater clarity.
Yeah, that's a huge point. I think I remember during the study, it got to a point where it kind of shifted in a sense of like, if we can just get those tools out there and an awareness to them, the rest kind of takes care of itself in a way. Once the foundation is set for an understanding of paying attention to the water that you're flowing and what you're doing, then everybody else can kind of decide. And I know there was a lot of discussion. Some guys were like, is this going to be you're going to tell us what we're going to use, whether it's a fog, or we're going to be told whether we're going to use a smooth bore. And that wasn't necessarily the plan. It was to provide the option of a low pressure, higher volume nozzle, as opposed to the great unknown automatic type of nozzle where you presume you're getting what you get, and the spring inside gives you a good stream, and you don't know any better. And so I remember that as something that was kind of that was a powerful point with that whole thing of showing those right tools, giving the right tools out there, and then everybody will run with it, and guys are going to know when they're not flowing enough.
When you guys did this, and this is something that's obviously, and we know it all in our world now, how important hose has become as a component of this evaluation. Was hose an issue when you were doing this in West Metro?
Right.
Man, we didn't have hose awareness. I mean, we had all kinds of different hose. We didn't. We obviously were talking with Jay and Daryl and stuff at the time, but we just didn't really have a hose awareness. It was what it was. Eric did a really good job of making sure that we evaluated a good cross section of the hose that we had and kind of averaged out the friction loss. But I mean, you probably be better to talk about what you're going through at Denver and how critical that is now, and how much more we know about. I mean, that was the missing piece of our study for sure. It wasn't fully evaluated as a system.
Yeah, I would say over the last couple of years here, maybe 5 years or so, and thankfully become good friends with Dennis Laguerre. There's been a significant amount of hose awareness as a result, as we could probably all say. But you realize, and I realized, and what an impact it makes to you have to take one with the other. You can't do it independently.
Mm-hmm.
And 1 3/4, as we all now know, is typically not 1 3/4. It's usually 1.88. And so coefficients that we used to use are out the window. And so that really brings in the importance of paying attention to what the pressure actually is. And the only way to do that is to get the system set up, your pre-connects or your hose laid out, and get a pitot gauge on it or an inline pressure gauge on it, and then figure out what your friction loss is based on the type of hose that you're using. Denver was a great place to develop this awareness, because for years we had used a hose vendor who just purchased a multitude of different varieties of hose and marketed them all as one type. And then we ended up with this great variety of hose in our inventories.
Mm-hmm.
So, we could have just a cross section of friction loss across the board because the hose was all different varieties of hose. Lately, I've been real lucky to work with the captain who's in charge of our hose ordering and speccing, and we're actually able to pair our desired flows, and the nozzles, the tips, with the hose that we're getting to get that desired result, which is a high flow, low volume, highly kink resistant setup.
Yep. It's funny. I don't think you can approach one without evaluating the other, because the awareness has surfaced. But I think it's interesting. You tested multiple vintages or that you had then and averaged out pressure. So I mean, you were heading in that direction now, despite the fact that all the knowledge that we have now wasn't there. Because I'm confident you really can't do a nozzle evaluation without doing a hose evaluation. You have to, because of the system's approach to it. And now that we understand the variable nature of hose diameter.
Yeah. There's no question they go hand in hand. I mean, it's not uncommon that, we feel the phone call saying, I just got these new Elkhart nozzles and they're junk because my hose kinks or whips or whatever. Right. So, I want to go get new equipment, but I want to switch from 100 PSI to 75 or 50 PSI overnight, and with no change to my hose. Right. Or I did I took the fog tip off and put the smooth bore on, and the stream looks like crap. Right. So that's kind of where I'm leading to now is, we've talked a little bit about kind of the overview, right? The global kind of questions that get us into the weeds a bit. And then you kind of got to start looking at what your spec is and maybe where you want it to go. So kind of like a self-assessment, if you will. I call it, like when we do our class, I call it like a funnel, right? You're way up here and you got to try all these things out to get it down to what's going to work. you know, for your department, your SOPs, your staffing, your hose, your nozzles, you know, the budget might not be in there for a new hose. You have to find something that works. So I'm going to throw this slide up, Brian. If you want to talk a little bit about the split ball, full ball, and then we can show the video. But this was a spec that they found in their West Metro stuff was, you know, looking at fogs and then going to smooth bore, but then, you know, not paying attention to what the shutoff is.
So I think what he's going to be bringing up is the picture. You know, this is from our study in 2005. I guess it was 2004. We pushed it out in 2005, and you know, this was a big part of where we were at. You know, Eric and I being young guys, they of course were like, you kids, you just want smooth bores so you can be like New York, you know. And it was we already got smooth bores and they suck. These types of things, and you know, one of the eye openers for us, and we just didn't know. All of our shutoffs had a split ball in it, and you know, it wasn't until we got a demo from Sure Sales for a smooth bore, we're like, whoa, something's different here. You know, this is an exact same slug tip as this other one, and you know, it's keeping the stream together. So did a little bit of look, and I think it was McGrail. I think, was it E when we went and met with McGrail, and we're like, man, something's wrong because we're pumping our smooth bores and the stream sucks. Should we get a stream shaper? And Chief McGrail and all his wisdom just basically said, well, you know, if you're pumping a smooth bore right, you shouldn't need a stream shaper. And what it was the agitation in it, you know, and thankfully we've learned a lot about nozzles, but that split ball was there because of high pressure nozzles. It was designed to help with that opening and closing, basically a Hydra assist in the opening and closing. And, you know, once we put those two pictures together, it clicked for, you know, a lot of the higher ups. It's like, you can argue with us all day long, but when you see the pictures and you see the spec, just paying this little more attention to the equipment we buy can make a huge, huge difference. And, it was significant. You know, that was a big part of that. And I think a lot of people, the nozzle evaluation is from the shutoff, you know, past the shutoff. What are we going to put on the end of this thing? But you really have to work your way all the way back through your shutoff, back through your hose. It's the same thing. You can't have unrealistic expectations. Jerry, we were just talking about this before we started. We get into the break apart nozzles and you start to get into a 200 GPM break apart. That's a big fog nozzle body to be putting on the end of an 1 3/4 hose line. It's like trying to have an orange on the end of a straw. So you got to be a little bit realistic with your expectations. Back to Chief McGrail, he says a reasonable expectation of a hose and the best performance is to just move the decimal. So 1 3/4, 1.75, you move the decimal, 175 GPM is the sweet spot for that line. You know, so anything above it is asking too much. Anything below it, you might be leaving some water on the table. So,
so to bring up the split ball there before we jump on to break apart nozzles, because I see Jerry's pouncing like Dennis. Hold on, Jerry, relax. Dennis, you're watching. If you are watching our Brass Tacks videos, there's a couple more. Dennis is just looks like he's going to jump right at you. But anyway, so we're going to throw up a little clip from Brian's. It's a split ball, full ball episode of Brass Tacks from season 1. Kind of is going to explain a little bit deeper what we're talking about and maybe what some of you might have countered if you're fighting this smooth bore fog fight. So stand by here. I'm going to throw up the video and we'll take a quick watch. It's just a couple.
Are the full round, the single cut, and the double cut. The full round has no assistance in that opening, but provides a nice, clean, clear waterway as the water travels through. The single cut ball has a little bit of assistance. As that pressure comes in, it catches this lip, and that volume and pressure helps assist with the opening and closing of the valve. But in the fully open position, you can see this single cut does create a void in the bottom of our waterway, and voids create turbulence. With the double cut ball valve, you can see we get the greatest assistance in both opening and closing due to the pressure and volume hitting that vein. But in the bottom of our waterway, you can see that we now have 2 void spaces, which creates turbulence and will disrupt the stream of the smoothbore nozzles. Again, this is not a factor in our higher pressure fog lines because it's a broken stream anyway. But in our smoothbore nozzles, we want to make sure we spec out proper shutoffs so we have a clean waterway with very little turbulence. Oftentimes, fire departments that are in fog tips want to evaluate smoothbore nozzles as an option, and they'll simply remove their fog tip and attempt to use a smoothbore. But as we spoke about before, that split ball shutoff that supported their fog tip now causes points of turbulence in the bale, which affects the quality of our smoothbore stream. These guys are going to open up and demonstrate how that split ball affects the smoothbore tip and the quality of the stream in these 1 3/4 lines. When we're evaluating the quality of the stream, we're going to start here at the nozzle. You can see as it leaves the nozzle, it's the appropriate pressure. We're fully open, but we start to get chatter just several inches away from the shutoff. And as that goes out, it reduces our breakover point. Go ahead and lower that one down. With the full round ball, you can see nice compact stream leaving the nozzle. Very
I gotta put everybody back on. So thanks for being patient with us. I think a good visual representation is Brian Kerr, who filmed all these, was on our first episode of this. That was the very first episode of Brass Tacks that we filmed. So, but it's a good visual of a lot of departments that you might have a split ball shutoff, and now you want to try the smoothbore thing, and the stream just doesn't look pretty.
You know, it's also a good example of, and Eric had mentioned this before, is going deep, because people have abandoned a mission based on the aesthetic. And if you did that and you wanted to go one direction or the other, let's say you were going from that fog tip and you wanted to go to a smooth bore, and people said, no, it looks horrible, it could put the brakes on something. So you have to do an in-depth evaluation, you have to go deep. Right? And I say this constantly, it's not brand driven, it's design driven. You have to take it apart, as Brian said, piece by piece, basically from where the nozzle firefighter is at the nozzle all the way back to the rig and everything in between. Because that depth of understanding, I see it a lot of times in my classes. We put up an animation of the 4 types of nozzles that are commonly used in the fire service, and it's like a revelation for people. You would think it would be a firefighter one-on-one type subject, but it's not, because we're driven visually. So to get the benefit out of it, you have to do what these fellows did. You have to go deep, and you also have to be able to document that. So the visual there, you've added another sense. It's not me coming in or you guys going into a chief and saying, hey, you know, we got this split thing. Our fires aren't going to go out anymore until we get a full round ball. And he's going to say, get out of my office. You know, you have to document it the right way.
Yeah, it brings up a huge point, and it ties into a question that we had there from Todd Edwards. He asked,
I'll throw that one up.
Yeah, it's up just a little bit. Perfect.
Hey, Todd.
Yeah, so how do we get the buy-in to start the evaluation for your departments? And, you know, as we kind of touched on, I think for us, we were young and gung-ho and engine nerds, to say the least, and we were just really lucky because it was the right time, and we had some really good support of the company officer, our lieutenant at the time, as well as that chief that we worked with in our firehouse, who challenged us and pushed against us, but then in the end ended up being probably one of our biggest assets to help us get it to where it needed to be. And that, you know, we talked a little bit before we got started here, like this would have never happened without some of that help to help get things up the chain of command, get the conversation carried over from just that the firefighter level up into the chief ranks, and to provide that awareness as why this is something that's actually important to consider. Todd, I hope that answers the question. You know, it's a sometimes it's just a matter of opportunity and getting that message out to take advantage of that opportunity.
You know, there was man. I mean, I bought my own 7/8 for the study. Eric was the one who went to Sure Sales and explained to them what he wanted to get done. So back to the young gung-ho and having luck, we also really weren't taking no for an answer either. The captain at the station made us swap out the nozzles every day. I mean, it was a tough environment, but you know, and I think that that's important. We know that there's a lot of guys out there, the Engine Zero crews, that are buying their own nozzles, or they're contacting Elkhart Brass for demos themselves, or going to these training groups and asking for them. And that's important, man. That could be the tipping point. You know, you have no idea how many firefighters out there just haven't had a smoothbore nozzle in their hand to know that it's not scary. You know, that haven't had a flow meter there to show. You know, the flow meters now are the truth serum. We didn't have access to just drop those on the fire ground and in our drill grounds and show what we were flowing. But now you can't argue with it. I mean, and then even Eric, you know, like if you can't buy a nozzle, you can't buy a flow meter, the pitot, man. I mean, you brought that up, that's more and more your go-to the further you go.
Yeah, I wish I had my pitot to hold up. There was something a while back. You were like engine nerds and held up a picture of an old pitot gauge, and I got the same one. So
he does have mountaineering equipment behind him, though. So there's an avalanche in that closet. Yeah. There's Jerry. Jerry's got his. Yeah.
You know, it's an interesting point about the equipment, though. You know, it has evolved. You guys, you were lucky. You had flow meters on the rig, so you had something to validate or disprove. You had a resource. You know, where that type of equipment is a lot more widely available now. But even, you know, with the amount that we do this and in-depth testing, even a digital flow meter is calibrated with the pitot. It's the simplest, you know, and it doesn't matter what size tip you have, you can correspond it to the flow. And that's where some of these resources, we were talking about this earlier, like, you know, the app that we created, the Brass Tacks Hard Facts engine calculator. You don't have to do this. And if you've ever been on a pitot, you've done this. You're like, oh, give me 5 pounds, drop it 10, you know, bring it up 3, trying to get to this perfect 50, where if you have a flow and you have a known pressure, put it into the app and it'll tell you what the flow should be, and you calibrate to that number. You know, the math there is reliable.
Looks like we lost Jerry.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, we lost Jerry for a second. Let's hang tight.
And back to like resources being in your organization. It was funny the other day, our engine 3 was out flowing and they broke my pitot gauge. And don't forget the other parts of your department. Our fire prevention division has pitot gauges. You know, they're the ones testing hydrants, water departments. So you may have those resources somewhere in your city or somewhere in your organization that's not necessarily the guys doing the work on the rigs.
Yep. Stand by here. Let's see what's up with Jerry. Gotta love being live here. The beauty of live television. Here's a shot too of the app that I'll throw up in the meantime. And this is what Jerry was referring to, where you can go to the App Store. It's just search Elkhart Brass or Brass Tacks or Elkhart calculator, and you'll get it. And you can get the flow rates. You can get a smoothbore calculator, the fog calculator, nozzle reaction, you name it. It's a really nice tool to be able to use to get the stuff on the fly. And again, if you have a digital pitot, again, like you said, if you have 47, you could type in 47 and boom, you've got it right there, and you can figure out what the flow is instead of trying to get up or get down. This might be a good time. I'm going to take me off, put Jerry on, but to wrap about nozzle reaction while we have this slide up here. So this is basically showing 3 flow rates. The same flow rate, 175 gallons a minute at different pressures. So 50, 75, 100, and how that can impact your nozzle reaction. So that's something I think back in the day, nozzle reaction wasn't on the table. It was all about flow and pressure, right?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it quite a bit in our study. It was highlighted because at the time, Grimwood was doing a lot of research on nozzle reaction, and I still default back to his work. And Laguerre gives a great analogy of GPM is your horsepower, but nozzle reaction is your traction. And I'm a huge fan of the 7/8 because I feel like the 7/8 gives you great traction and a good volume. And if you over pump a 7/8, then you have a 15/16. So that's kind of the camp I'm in. And you can see that right here in this lineup is that all nozzles have a range. Smoothbores work best at 50 PSI, but you can under or over pump them. So find that sweet range. E right now, just before we came on, he was talking about under pumping the 15/16. And with the right hose, he likes that attack package. So, I mean, I can, argue for the 7/8. So E, I think talking about the 188 and the 15/16 at that lighter pressure would be good too.
Yeah, just like over pumping a 7/8 to get a 15/16 flow, it works the other way as well. And that really honestly came from just getting out there and flowing as much as we could, getting that nozzle in our hands, and then realizing that if we drop it down just a little bit, it decreases that nozzle reaction, and it allows the nozzle firefighter to be more effective in getting that water where we want it to be. And as you get more versed with that, more comfortable with that, you start to feel that more. You realize that you can be a more effective firefighting machine, if you will, getting that water flowing, getting it where it needs to be, and you're fighting fire as opposed to fighting nozzle reaction.
Right.
And one of the catalysts for that is real interesting is when the 1 3/16 came out, and Dennis's thing with pumping it at the 50 or pumping it to get the 300 GPM or pumping it at the 40 to get the 265. It also applies to the 15/16 for us. And that's in some of the tests with Denver now, we found that if we can pair those two together and kind of present that to the crews, it makes a pretty simple package. You can pump it at 50 and get this much, and you're going to have to work a little bit more, work harder to get those higher flows, but drop it back a little bit and increase your effectiveness of when you're moving that line, especially for interior operations. It makes a real nice combination there.
Yeah, I think that's gold. Over pumping or under pumping is an asset so long as it's done intentionally.
Yeah.
But you have to test it to find out what it's flowing at those numbers. And that, the other factor that comes in is what we were talking about before. It could be hose dependent. It might get sloppy at 40, but then again, there's people that have, horrible hose that we go the opposite way. They want 15/16 flow, but the hose is floppy, you got lazy water, so you back down to a 7/8 and pump it hot, build up some more pressure behind it. So it's a tool. It shouldn't be done by accident.
What's interesting, Jerry, too, is the more we can get the nozzle in people's hands, the better understanding they have, and a lot of that is the nozzle reaction. We've kind of the 3 of us, the 4 of us, we've had done a lot of work. We kind of know just by what's coming against us is whether that line's right.
Yep.
To quantify that, man, as far as nozzle evaluations, now I'm trying to draw a blank. Box alarm training out of Louisiana State University, I believe. He did an EFO paper with the Fire Academy guys. And just once they really worked on nozzle handling, the cadets were able to recognize the change in nozzle reaction and that impact on their flow.
Yep.
So when they did open the nozzle all the way, if they weren't getting what they were expecting, then they were communicating back down the line that reduction in flow, so that knowing that is a critical component. If we can really drive home, get lines in kids' hands, get lines in firefighters' hands as much as possible, when they open that bail all the way and they're not feeling what they should recognize that they're underflowing, because that lack of nozzle reaction is lack of flow.
Yep.
And that's an important part. If we're getting too much, then we start to gate down. But if we're all the way open and we're not getting what we need, that's a safety factor.
It's one of the things I encourage when they're doing that is, and this is where what we call a scribe becomes real important. When they're experiencing that, somebody needs to be there documenting that. Right. So, if you're senior guy, all right, your go-to nozzle firefighter is saying, "Hey boss, it's kicking my butt." You need to note that. Right. So when you look at the solution in comparison, you want the feedback from that, because that becomes validation. It's going to be, let's say I'm the chief that you're presenting to, and I haven't seen the street in 15 years. And I'm going to be like, well, what did our badass think? So that it has merit. So the person that's taking all this information in should be putting some weight on those personal responses, that feedback.
Yeah, it's qualitative data, and I think if you can, and they popped it up in the chat, Matt Hinkle, definitely look up his EFO paper on flow rates and nozzle reaction. It's if you need that kind of information, that kind of supporting documentation for your nozzle evals, go get it. Right. It's extremely valuable.
Well, what we've got up there in a picture now is the type of thing we use in the street. You guys have all seen it, but we have to go deep. It's like Chris was saying earlier, it's like a funnel. We start with this massive amount of information, and we have to get all those data points to the point where they make sense so that we can make a recommendation. And that's where the comprehensive nature of an eval comes into play. You need to look at all designs that are on the table. You can't preclude one just because you don't like it. You don't approach change in an organization based on an opinion or emotion. It has to be data driven, and you have to have all that information done. So it's exhaustive to get there, but it's worth it because you've got a high probability of getting the win. But you need to document very heavily those differences in nozzle reaction of comparable flows at different pressures. It's like the three we had up there before. I think it was a 175. We showed it at 50, 75, and 100. That's a visual to somebody that isn't as intense about the subject matter as you are, right? And that's the type of thing you have to put into an evaluation as it starts to go up the chain of command for change.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I showed this to you guys earlier. I brought this out. This was the binder that we put together for that study, and I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here, and going back through it, it's been a long time since I looked at this, but it's I got to say, like, we put a lot of time into this thing, and tried to cover all the aspects, and thank goodness we had some really good help, some good mentors who were able to kind of steer us in the right direction, because we sat down with them, or I should say they sat us down. Like, this is what they're going to ask you, and you have to be able to answer this and have this and be ready for things. And ultimately, that I really do believe that's what allowed that study to be successful.
Hey, E, would you do me a favor? The reference page back there, I mean, there was a lot of articles that I don't know are as accessible now. The one from the Ontario Fire College, the St. Petersburg retooling of the 1-inch tip, where they took the 1-inch. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of resources in that book that may kind of have vaporized since then. They're not the flashy ones, but they are solid material.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, looking at that, I really enjoyed going back to revisit this, because I would say almost half of it was referenced material from, we had, of course, we mentioned Paul Grimwood, but then that chief was Chief Chris Powers from the Ontario Fire College, Fire Streams, Ventilation, and Firefighter Safety, which was one of our main articles that we drew upon for qualitative data from another place who'd gone through a lot of that same thing that we were looking at. And of course, Jay Camella, Andy Fredericks, and about, let's see, 8 or 10 others that we're doing a similar thing. And it's interesting because there's a lot of comments coming in on the side here about, you know, we didn't know this, or this is something new, or so on and so forth. And yet there's a lot of this information from way back when. There's a lot more on top of it, but are we doing a good enough job of really getting it out there? You know, and it goes back to that concept of how do you get these things to take place, these nozzle studies, how do you get some traction to go with it? And even as Todd Edwards mentioned, they're still running SM20s, I think he said.
30.
You know,
30.
SM30s. That right there should be, you know, it's a reason to push for that change to happen, for just for the safety of the guys in the line, at the very least, to know what they're flowing. Because that you know, we use that now. We use those SM20s and SM30s nowadays as the demonstration model to show you don't know what you're getting. You know.
Yeah. No offense, Elkhart.
Yeah.
Everything's got an application, right? We get asked a lot in class, like, you know, they're great for industrial fire brigades, use them a lot when you have high ring pressure and you're not working off a pump, you're working off a main. They're great for foam because they have a wide range. They'll work all over your foam adductor. They're great for anything you need to reach for, basically, right? But it can be deceptive based on the look of the stream. And that is just something you have to know. You know, every nozzle's got a pro and a con. And, you know, look at a selectable flow. Same thing. A lot of people like the ring to be able to select their flow. A lot of people don't, you know. That's why there's, you know, Fords, Chevys, SUVs, pickups, light duty, heavy duty. You know, you got to find the right tool for the right job, right? We'll get a lot of questions on here, and I think a good topic that comes up a lot, it seems to be coming up a lot lately, in a lot of the groups and online. And a couple of the questions here is break apart nozzles, right? So we've got a Brass Tacks video we've done on break apart nozzles that I think would maybe be a good kicker. And then maybe get some of your feedback on what you think about break aparts. You know, a lot of people think it's, you know, maybe it's a compromise, fog and a smooth bore, use what you want. Then that also leads to some pumping issues, right? Do I pump for the smooth bore? Do I pump for the fog? So how about just to get another track of conversation going here on break aparts, I'm going to take me off again, and I'm going to throw Jerry's break apart nozzle video that shows some of the implications of kind of making a nozzle system, you know, whether it's a smooth bore next to a fog, i.e. cross A1, cross A2, or putting them on the same nozzle, and what kind of issue that could or cannot have for you. A lot of people love them. Again, a lot of people don't like them. So I think it's probably a good time to chat about these. So stand by here. I'm going to throw up the video, and I'll be right back.
As opposed to a full nozzle body, the shutoff and the combination tip are separate pieces. The shutoff can be an open waterway or can have an integrated smooth bore, thus giving you a smooth bore and a combination ability with choice at the nozzle. If you were to have an obstruction or a clog on the combination nozzle you couldn't pass, you have the ability to shut down and pull the fog tip off to pass the debris. Another advantage would be if you find yourself frequently having to extend from the nozzle point, you can shut down, remove the combination tip, add a length, and extend from this portion of the stretch. There's a couple different ways you can achieve a two-piece or a break-apart nozzle at comparable flows. You can use an integrated smooth bore shutoff. In this case, it's a 7/8, which would flow roughly 160 gallons a minute at 50 psi. It's a common misconception that if I was to put a 160 at 50 fixed flow fog on this shutoff, that they would both be flowing 160 gallons a minute. That in fact is not true. The fog would be underpumped because we're not compensating for the integrated smooth bore, which is basically functioning as an appliance in the line. The only way I can get hydraulic balance between a smooth bore and a fog would be an example where we have two crosslays, one with an open butt shutoff and a 7/8 smooth bore on it, and one with an open butt shutoff with a 160 at 50 fixed flow fog on it. There I would have balance of 160 gallons a minute at the same pump discharge pressure through either line. I can utilize an integrated smoothbore and the fog combination. I just have to recognize through testing what the differences in the flow are. I can hit an in-between number by over pumping it to get the fog to increase in flow, or just accept the fact that it may be within 10 or 15 GPM of my 160 target with the fog flowing less water. Here's an example of some of the hydraulic considerations we referred to. The crew has an integrated smoothbore with a 7/8 tip. Flow meter is showing 162 gallons a minute. That's dialed in. They'll shut down and transition to a 160 at 50 fixed flow fog. Once we put the fog tip on, we see our flow has dropped to 153. So we're within 5 or 10 GPM, but we don't have perfect hydraulic balance, primarily because we're pumping through the integrated smoothbore, which is compromising our flow. Here we see a common tactic that's done in the field to either protect threads or to improve the quality of the stream. It's counterproductive. It actually degrades the quality of the stream. We've got an integrated smoothbore tip of 7/8, and we've taken a short 187XD 7/8 tip and put it over to protect the threads. What we've done in effect is created a ridge or a shelf within the waterway, and we've taken the smoothness out of the waterway, and you see the resulting impact in the fire stream.
Sorry, Jerry, you're on mute. Stand by.
Yeah.
You're back. Can you hear everybody good?
Yeah. So I think that was a great segment, and you know, just based on some stuff that we've had happen here this week with contacts from the field, still a subject that's extremely relevant. It can be confusing, but let's go back to what we just learned from listening to Eric and Brian. Take the system apart piece by piece and understand what your objective is. If you want hydraulic parity, which is the exact same flows, you're not going to get there with an integrated smoothbore if you want the same performance criteria. So you look at one side by side, a 7/8 with a 160 at 50, whatever it may be, your flow objective. The break apart to me is still a viable option with the fog being at lesser flow. You can also, through testing, get it to the point where it's even closer to that 160, but it wouldn't be with a 160 at 50 stem. It would be with a different stem. So I think the value of building a break apart comes down to what you really want it to do. You know, go back to the original objective. You want a target flow by line size. All right. We're willing to accept, like you were saying before, operation somewhere between 40 and 60 PSI with a smoothbore to benefit us. Well, that has a difference in flow, just like a fog would. There's a lot of people that use an integrated smoothbore with a fog flowing 10 or 15 GPM less, and the fog is used on certain types of fire, and then the smoothbore is used on structural fires. It comes down to whether it solves a problem for you, but you have to identify the impact that it's going to have hydraulically. It can't be guesswork, but you can get them to the point where they're pretty close, because one of the biggest advantages of a break apart is the fact that you have choice at the nozzle position without a change at the pump.
Yeah, Jerry, I think that's a good one, because I even stumbled over that. Was a big fan of matching the smoothbore tip to the fog, so that way it is that hydraulic parity. But as you show, a 7/8 integrated with a 150 at 50 is a better pairing. A 15/16 integrated with a 175 fog is a better pairing. So just being aware of that is good. And another thing I will kind of hit on is, those departments that are trying to initiate smoothbores and those types of things, once again, realize that this is an educational process. It's not an equipment process. And if guys have a better understanding, then that's the win, rather than having smoothbores on everything. And know the climate that you're in. And Jerry will make me eat my words, because he still holds it against me. I think 15 years ago, I once said that a break apart nozzle is just compromised, screwed on the top of compromise. But man, you saw in that video that XD break apart nozzle is solid, that slug tip. But to that end, any exterior streams, if you're a department that does resets, if you're a department that does transitional attack, having that break apart, that quick access break apart for a guaranteed solid stream that you can get straight, steep steady is what you need. If your department is still requiring fogs for interior attack for whatever reason, being able to spin, as Jerry said, back on that fog to go interior. But any exterior stream should be a solid stream. We don't want to have it influenced by wind. We don't want to have it potentially seal up that exterior opening. Just that guarantee that it's going to be solid, straight, steep, steady is a key in having that break apart as part of our fire attack package. With all the water mapping that we know about, I think you can empirically show that any exterior water application should be a solid stream, so that way there's no variable in play at all.
Yep. Yeah, Brian, I have found it interesting how your position on a break apart has evolved.
We soften in our old age, Jerry. You know that.
You know, I guess that, you know, the thing is, it's not the enemy if you understand it, and you know, it's a conscious decision. We can't make things to the point where firefighters don't have to make decisions. Let's have a little confidence in the ability of the American firefighter or boss to call for the right piece of equipment. You know, I have a pretty good experience with break aparts with integrated smoothbores, and they work well if you train to what they're used for, and the flows are accomplishing the objective for why it was spec'd that way. Thanks for putting that up, Chris. I want to go back. I don't want to digress too much on the automatic, but I do want to make a point, because the automatic is a good example of a point that you can put into your evaluation without attacking a design. A point of criteria in an evaluation is whether you want a visual indication in the stream that you have compromised supply. And if you want a visual indicator of a compromised supply, you're not going to use something with a spring. So it completely takes it out of the equation if you put that as an objective in the evaluation. So you don't have to say this nozzle is better than this nozzle, or we want to get rid of this because we think it sucks. Put in there why you want. You don't want guesswork with respect to flow. So a visual indication of compromised supply would take an automatic out of your evaluation.
You were part of the Engine Essentials group at FDIC. I mean, how about the weapon selection stuff that you guys cover in there?
Yeah, you know, that's I can't say that I can take much credit for that. That's all Kurt Isaacson doing that.
That'll be next week at Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern. Kurt Isaacson, weapon selection. Sorry to jump on you there.
Plug there.
Yeah. Anyway.
But, yeah, I would also say that there was a natural gravitation for Kurt and I to kind of start working together as well. But yeah, you know, it's one of those things that when you get out there and you can really dive into the details of it and put the lines in guys' hands, Kurt goes so far as to use a fishing scale nailed to a stake, and then you can actually look at the pounds force against that in that nozzle reaction, and then you can feel it and you can work it down the line. The automatic fog hooked up with a flow meter, and then the next one over is the smoothbore, and then the next one is the constant gallonage fog at the same pressure as the smoothbore. And you can, once you start to feel that difference, you can see that difference. That's one of the actual pleasures of instructing, is when you're there for that and you get that student that the light bulb turns on for them and they actually see it and it registers. It's a pleasure, and that's such a neat thing to experience.
I think that drives us all, that epiphany. It really does. It just, you know, it's like, hey, we're there. Yeah. we have understanding of a subject.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Guys,
step back on something else too that has been kind of touched upon a few times, both in how to go about a study in your department. But then if you're also looking at what the package that you currently have, you can't really do that without the historical perspective of what you have at the time. In Denver, for example, all of our fog tips, and many still are at this time, are 75 PSI fogs, and they're the larger body fogs. But what that did was then by the engineers pumping those at the higher pressure because of the poor hose that we had over the years. It helped to stiffen that line up and counteract that weight out at the end of the line and provide a good stream. The problem with that was many engineers then overpumped the 15/16ths at the same side, and then you had to always try to figure out, well, what line got pulled? Did that have that 75 fog, or was it the 15/16 smoothbore? And so, for many of the engineers, it was always having to it was a challenge to get the right exact pressures for that right exact nozzle. So what we've done now is tried to really look at how do we simplify the evolution, paying attention to what we had in the past, and realizing that we really needed to pair that hose with that nozzle, simplify the pump charts, simplify the pump discharge pressures, get a reasonable nozzle reaction, and go from there. And that gave us understanding with that historical perspective of why things were, and build upon that now. And as Brush mentioned too, the other huge part of that is then having that educational component. And one of the plans then with Denver is as we move forward with what we've gone through on our nozzle study, hose and nozzle study package that we've done is we have to now rewrite the understanding or re-educate the crews on under pumping things from what they were used to and knowing what their flows are going to be as they get those lines. There's a lot to it, but somebody else wrote on there, I think it was John from Texas, it really is that 5% pressure 100% of the time. Just keep pushing and you'll get there.
Yep. Step by step. The interesting thing, and you guys, in addition to your side jobs, side work, have both had the opportunity now to be involved with more than one nozzle evaluation on your jobs, and that's something that's not common. One of the things that I share a lot when I'm in the field is put the proper amount of respect to being a part of this group, because it's usually a once in a career change. It's not the type of commodity of equipment that gets, I kid around, it's not toilet paper. You're going to be using it for 15 years or so. So do yourself the job as it stands now, justice, and put the time and effort and work into it, but you're doing it for the next group as well. But that ties right into the historical perspective. Don't attack what you necessarily have. It might have been the right choice at another point in time. You don't have to convince anybody of that. That's not part of what responsibility is. You just have to document what it is, how it's evolved, and why. The SM30 comment that came on there, there was historically a bunch of people that used SM30s automatics as a kind of a half-assed fixed GPM. They were looking for a target flow of 150 to pump the thing light, and they had a decent stream because of the spring. So they were kind of making their own low pressure, high volume nozzle. That was for people that understood what was happening with the flow on that authentic. And that's changed, because that's, again, it's driven by aesthetics, not by flow.
Hey, Jerry, with that, I think it'd be a good time for you to inform guys on the bigger body nozzles. Because, we're talking about breaker parts, but we're also talking about the SM30s. I think it's important for people to understand that the breakover point in the nozzle size. All shutoffs are relatively the same size. It's the same shutoff on an 1 3/4 as it is on a 2.5. But that fog tip body is a big difference. And I think people, they want to get a 185 and a 175, and then when they get it in their hands, it is a major difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, you're talking about the one pairing that it is usually the problem, and it's pairing a fog to a 15/16 inch smoothbore, and that the 175 threshold is where you go from one body size in our fog tip to the next bigger size. And you can do a 185 at 50, but it's a pretty ominous size tip. So you now have bulk and you have weight on something that you're putting on the end of the nozzle. I've never recommended a 185 at 50 to pair with a 1516 solely based on the size and the weight of it. And the fact that if you understand you're not going to be at perfect hydraulic parity, that a 175 at 50 in the smaller bumper size would be the proper pairing for it, because the flows are going to be just as close as they would be with a 185, but now you've made the size and the weight less. Mm-hmm. So that's part of the evaluation is you can't build it on paper. You need to put it in your hands. And you need to compare those two side by side. And if I was to set, it wouldn't really matter who I was talking to. If I set a 185 at 50 next to a 175 at 50 and pump them both and they were within 10 GPM of what my target flow was, it would be pretty obvious what the choice would be. So, and it just comes down to being depth and evaluation, right? But thanks for giving me the chance to bring that up, Brian, because it's a common problem. If you're after hydraulic parity, you have to understand, especially at higher flows, once you get above that 170 into that 200 GPM threshold, the equipment's going to be bigger.
And then isn't that SM30 basically a 200 plus automatic? It's not really the 150 automatic.
No, 30 is 75 to 3 1/4, but it's a big bumper. It's a huge bumper. Yeah, the waterways have to be bigger for those flows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's why a 20 and an SM20 caps out at 200.
Yeah, and just a reference from our study back in 05, the SM20s that we had in service, they were at 150 GPM. They had a nozzle reaction of 75 pounds force. So thinking about that, it was no wonder that guys were asking the engineer to drop that pressure. Because even at 150, they were saying that trying to battle 75 pounds is a lot. And
yeah, that's a big number.
The average or the sweet spot that's been found is about 60 pounds for one firefighter to handle that line, which probably puts them right into that range of what we were getting, what was found to be about that 120 to 130 GPM. Right?
Yeah. It was once you did all the math, it was no surprise. Our guys preferred the 7/8 with a nozzle reaction of about 60 PSI, and the department average for pumping our automatics was about 120. Mm-hmm. And at 100 PSI, the nozzle reaction is half. So I mean, they really, by putting the 7/8 in the hand, we just matched the nozzle reaction to what they were used to, you know. But with that, rather than getting 120 GPM, they're getting 40 more gallons per minute.
And those are the revelations you find in testing. And then, you know, for the people that on the sidebars are saying, how do you document the case for change? That's how you do it.
I think the other thing that I'm going to pop up here, Jerry, Greg Redmond's asking, you know, he says hydraulic balance, right? So you refer to hydraulic balance as something we all understand. And he also says something about hydraulic parity. So, you know, Greg, I know you're out there, you've been commenting all night, but if Jerry, you want to go a little bit deeper on what you mean by hydraulic balance and hydraulic parity, and if Greg, we're in the right wheelhouse for that.
Yeah, Greg, thanks for bringing that up, because I can't assume that everybody understands why I'm using a particular word. I'm using those basically to accomplish the same thing. The subject matter was a break apart. When I talk about hydraulic balance, what I'm referring to is, regardless of whether it's a smoothbore or a fog, the tip pressure and the PDP would be the same irrespective of the nozzle design. So if we had that, my example was a 7/8 inch smoothbore would have a PDP to get 160 gallons a minute. And if I had another 1 3/4 line of comparable hose with a 160 at 50 fog tip on it, at the same pump discharge pressure, I'd be at the same flow. So they would pair. It wouldn't matter which one I would pull, I would have my target flow. So rather than having to have one of each of those side by side, some people might opt for an integrated smoothbore with the fog tip attached to it. So now the choice becomes at the nozzle as opposed to which line I'm pulling. And what I'm saying there is you would not have that hydraulic parity or balance. They would not be the exact same flows without a modification in pump discharge pressure. So that's what you would have to test, is to identify what the less amount of flow would be out of that fog, and make a decision based on that number. Is that acceptable to me? Or would I want to modify my pump discharge pressure when I was using the 5 nozzle? So when I say parity or balance, I'm talking about the exact same flow, the exact same PDP, regardless of the nozzle design.
And that's exactly what we're shooting for in Denver now, is the pairing of a fog tip with the smoothbore tip, so that it, no matter what line comes off, if it's 200 feet in length, 1 3/4 inches, doesn't matter. The engineer doesn't have to know what tips on the end. Know that this is the pump discharge pressure.
And that's it. And it should be predicated on flow, right? You know, one of the first things an evaluation committee should benchmark is the target flow by line size. Forget about what type of nozzles on it. Okay. If we want our target flow to be 175 gallons a minute on 1 3/4, that becomes your benchmark, right? Same thing with the big line, or if you're using an intermediate hose. And at that point, you start looking at the equipment. And this takes you go back to that yellow sheet that we put up that had all those boxes. This is how we get there, right? You're going to look at all those different types of nozzles at that target flow, and then compare them at 50, 75, and 100 PSI to find if you need to provide that epiphany for somebody to realize that 50 PSI is going to give you the least amount of nozzle reaction without compromising flow. Nothing in the evaluation should compromise your flow objective. You can overpump, underpump, or modify anything in that system so long as you don't compromise the objective for flow, regardless of the nozzle design, because the flow is what puts the fire out.
So I'm going to keep moving this on here. So we've talked about kind of the overview, the spec, how to institute the change, how to have the conversation, how these little details matter. And then I'm going to pop up a photo here of E on his back step, which I really like. He calls his office, right? So Jerry and I were out at the Mile High Firefighters Conference a couple of years ago. Awesome conference. And we went over to Eric's firehouse. They had us for dinner, and he gave us a tour right away. We got to see the rig and the hose and nozzle setup. And he said, welcome to my office, right? So we've worked our way through this evaluation cycle, okay? So now here's your big day. You got what you wanted. You got your nozzles you wanted, and you got your hose that you wanted, that the study steered you to. That's the best for your job, right? So here they are. They show up. Now, typically what happens, right? You're the guy or guys or gals that did the study. How are we going to roll this out to the department, right? What's the next step to make sure that everybody is now on the same page with this big change, that the people that, you know, just because water's coming out of the end of the line, everything's groovy, to now the people literally squared away. So whoever wants to jump in on that, feel free. But let's talk a little bit now. You know, you were successful in your case for change. Now, how do we get that instituted across the job?
Yeah, I'll jump on that one. I mean, it really highlights that importance of the educational component of it all, because you really can have any nozzle on the end of a line, and an educated firefighter who's, say it into the job, who gets what that nozzle is going to do, is going to do what they need to do with that nozzle. The biggest part with that, though, comes to educate to the masses, to get everybody on the same page, which is such a challenge in some regards, because you have so many variables at play of culture, of varying levels of acceptance of what's cool to know, of what you want to understand, of what people have been taught, of change, so many different things. But therefore lies the I guess the paramount importance of facts and getting the numbers in place so that people can see it, and then having the people get out there and flow it and understand it. And then you've laid that groundwork, and then the rest is up to them. But once that's out there and the education can take place of what it is, what it's all about, that I think is so important, you know, and it kind of should quell the debates of what we used to do or what we have now or historically, or some places use fog nozzles or these. Right now with the simple package based on GPM, based on a reasonable nozzle reaction and the ability to get water where it needs to be to put the fire out, that makes all the difference.
How do they say that? Well said.
I think if you're going to take this on, you know, Chris, you're really bringing up a good point. Like, if you're going to take this on, the work doesn't stop when the PO gets issued. You have to accept this from education to implementation and all the way through. So you have to understand your job's not going to be done when it's just purchased. You got to see it through. And that was eye-opener for Tollund and I. You know, we went through the nozzle study, and they're like, all right, together the training program. And we had to weather that, and we had to think about that. But really all we defaulted back to was the things that made us successful in this nozzle study for showing guys and making the difference. And then just trusting the information. You know, if you trust the information, believe in that, that's what's going to get you through. But the work doesn't end. The nozzle show up, now it is Pandora's box, your hose loads, you know, what gets tackled next. You got to be prepared for the questions that come with it. But, you know, it's funny for them to, you know, we went through the nozzle study. The members overwhelmingly prefer the 7/8. 15 years later, they're now in the 7/8. So it's like you also have to accept that too, that you may never see the destination, but if you set the right direction, that's the biggest win. So it's a fun part. And then, you know, going through the 1 3/4 study, obviously most departments start there. Most of the departments work on that, but take any angle you can. If your department is currently in automatics, but you're evaluating your standpipe packages, that's the opportunity to bring this in from a whole nother angle. If your department is speccing out a new rig and you're talking about master streams and deck guns, however you see that opportunity to address an organizational change and look at fire attack as a system, because you will fail your department if you continue to address things as single items and not as a system. All the way back to supply and delivery. So if you're into this stuff, man, seek out the opportunity wherever they're doing it. I mean, a ton of work with standpipes. You know, this groundwork late was a foundation that was huge for us to change to standpipe kits at West Metro. I know a lot of other organizations, Eric, you're probably familiar with them. It works backwards. They get the smooth bores and the standpipes, and then it works down to their rigs. So, but in the 2.5, it's much tighter clearances, I guess. You know, when you think about something operating at 65 PSI, 6.5 PSI difference on a line being overpumped is a 10% increase. So you really have to know what you're doing. In an 1 3/4 game, it's horseshoes and hand grenades. If you're 5 to 10 PSI off, it's no big deal. If you're overpumping an 1 1/4 tip by 10 PSI, you're putting somebody in a very dangerous situation. So, or underpumping an 1 1/4 tip at 10 PSI, the potential flow compromise is huge. So, I mean, you've been a part of a lot of standpipe evaluations, not necessarily at Denver, but being a resource for a lot of other departments. Have you seen things work back that way?
Yeah, you know, it is I think it's apples to apples kind of. You know, it goes hand in hand with each other, and that's understanding the high volume, low pressure environment. You know, the simplicity of it is really hard to beat when you understand the effectiveness of it. So yeah, it definitely goes together, and I think that sometimes is the catalyst. The light bulb goes on for a lot of people in that regard. There's some really good questions. I wouldn't mind tackling. I wrote down a couple of them if I got a minute or two to do that.
Yeah, go for it, Eric. If you remember what they are, who said them, I can throw them up on the screen there.
Yeah, David Hatton, Hatin, I believe it was, wrote one, what's a good target flow? And that back in the original nozzle study, you know, we definitely had to have as many things in order as to the real why and what was our background for necessitating a GPM that we wanted to get as a target flow. And the best place to start with that is NFPA. And if you look at, you know, NFPA 1710, they have it laid out that that it's a 150 GPM. So it's easy to fall back on that NFPA number. So if you can shoot for that 150 and then build upon that as your goal, your target flow, that's one of the easiest things you can do. Then another question I really like,
just a little bit on the 150. That 150 comes from that 300 overall from 2 lines for residential.
yeah.
So and that was really one of the early versions of NFPA 1710. So you're still looking at, I mean, it's in the documentation, but still that 150 number was pre UL Firestream study, pre the legacy versus modern. They were getting good traction on it, but you know, a minimum is just that. You know, I think a 160, 175 range is probably more appropriate for modern stuff. You can look at the UL stuff and you'll see, and Dennis and a lot of people will talk about 150 is killing a lot of fire, but man, I'm certainly would rather have go in with the 160, 175, knowing that we're going to suffer a few kinks on the way in, and rather than starting with 150 and losing it on the path.
Yeah, and that's perfect to talk about because it's 150 is definitely at the lower end, and it's funny because we had a conversation on the rig just the other day about fire flow formulas, and yeah, great to throw out in the promotional tests. But what's the reality of those? I've never really bought into them because, at least where I work, you know, I've gone into living rooms and there's the stack of tires up against the wall in the living room, and then a motorcycle, and you know, so many other things.
Federal.
Yeah, it's just craziness. So you never know what that burn package, what's going to be going on inside, and basing your attack line selection, your water flow based on what you see upon arrival, the amount of fire that's showing, it holds a lot more water, if you will, on that regard. Another thing, yeah, you like that. Another thing this kind of leads into was another question, and I'm looking back for it. There it is. Jonathan Fitzgerald talked about. Can you comment on kinks and GPM drops in 15/16 versus 7/8? And if I'm reading this correctly, it sounds like the 7/8 produces more GPM because you're pretty likely to have a kink going around a couch or corner, where you're going to have a greater kink, reducing more flow with the 15/16. This is actually something that we did in Denver in our evaluations. We put both those tips on and had a set number of kinks that we put into the lines, and then evaluated the flow at each one. And one of the things that we continued to find was it was a percentage drop, and based on the 185 at 50 from the 15/16, that percentage then dropped similarly, but because you're flowing 165 on the 7/8, it actually dropped lower than we were shooting for. So we were able to stay above the target flow, for example, of the 150 with the 15/16. Now, an important thing to consider with that is, even though we stayed higher with that 50 PSI on the 15/16, I'm a big fan of pumping it at 40, which gives you the flow of a 7/8 tip. So that 165-ish range. It's so dependent upon your hose. And the thing that we found is using the Pond Conquest. We've had real good success with that hose, and you almost have to work to put kinks into it, which demands, I feel like, an attention to the detail to not get so lackadaisical with that line, because now all of a sudden you don't have to pay as much attention to it as you used to. So when you do get a kink, you actually really do notice a drop in that flow. So again, it ties back into that nozzle and hose package and understanding what that flow is going to be. Another thing I want to end this little piece with is when you spend the time getting out and flowing and recognizing that you get a drop in flow, one of the things that a lot of people will tend to do is get on the radio and call for more pressure. But if you're practiced at it and you're diligent with it, you realize that your engineer, because you've trained so much with it, you've worked so much with it, you know they're not under pumping you. You know you've got a lack of flow, most likely because of a kink, which demands the diligence of those backup firefighters. being there to manage that line coming
And kinks are always a hot topic. This is probably one of the most frequently asked questions when you get into what should we go with. You know, you have a lot of traditional guys saying, well, we want the 100 psi line because it's more kink resistant. And the smooth bores, the low pressure lines are more prone to kinking. And the easiest analogy that I can say is take a McDonald's straw. It's going to fight the bend for a longer period of time. It's a kink. Where a low pressure line is like a garden hose. You can wrap it in a circle. So I'm not a big fan of the hard and fast rules of a kink is 15%. I see that thrown out there a lot, but if you go out and you flow, one great example is to run a Vita hose through a doorway and pull it. A lot of times in those higher pressure lines that when you're pulling that hose back through the doorway, it will create a full kink. Whereas a lower pressure line, as you're pulling it through the doorway, it'll just reduce the arc and just reduce your flow a little bit. So you may not see the flow reduction in the lower pressure lines. So a good example. And my wife was putting the dogs in the yard. So. But I would challenge everybody to get out and do kink tests with people, because you would be shocked how much one kink impacts 100 psi line versus multiple kinks on a low pressure line.
And that, let me just frost both those cupcakes, if I could. And it kind of goes back to Dave Hatton's question.
My wife just walked through here, Jerry.
Easy.
It's a good reason not to have your target flow, right? If your target flow is the minimum, you're one kink away from getting your butt handed to you. So, you know, it has to be tested as a system, but I don't think you'll find an engine instructor on the circuit that would embrace anything below 150 on an 1.5 inch coupling, especially for an 1 3/4 hose. If you were flowing less than that, you might as well go back to 1.5 inch, right? Make it easier on your people. So a target flow between 150 and 200 on 1 3/4 is probably 95% of what I would run into. And you can either get that by over pump and under pump or whatever your world needs to be based on your reality. But it better be based on your reality, not someone else's, because the variables are just way too much.
Chris, you falling asleep?
No, I'm good. What other questions do you have there, Eric?
Say that again. Stretch.
What was your other question that you had?
That was the two of them that really stuck out to me.
Got it. And then I'm going to throw this one up that I saw from Whit Dodson that kind of goes maybe back to the rollout. And again, you know, day one, all your stuff shows up, and now you're basically the educator having to teach the rest of the department all the stuff you kind of found out on your own. But when we start teaching hydraulics, and basically he's asking us, are there any changes on the horizon to books that teach hydraulics with the condensed Q-hand method, or have there ever been a new formula developed? And he had another one up here. Sorry, I clicked the wrong one, guys. That also plays into the same thing. That basically teaching new engineers is where we're going with this. You know, do we skip, quote, knowing our flows so they can understand theoretical to pass the examinations, right? So it's the old, like, what do you learn in the book to pass a test versus what do you have to learn, you know, to match your own fire department SOP? You know, my experience, we're going to teach what, you know, we do every day, but it's kind of like, hey, you need to kind of know the stuff to pass the test because it's just basic good hydraulics firemanship. So what are your guys' opinions?
Yeah, I'll jump on that one too. I just had this discussion yesterday at the firehouse because one of my guys went to take his acting engineer test this morning, and we were talking about it, and I had to say, bro, all the stuff that we do, you can't think about that because that's the test is going to be focused on the actual formulas and the coefficients that go with that hose.
Right.
Which 1 3/4 hose, which we don't have any 1 3/4 hose. You know, it's all 1.88. So we base what we do out there in the real world based on what we actually have. So yeah, you it's a great thing you bring up there in the theoretical versus in the real world, just to pass the exams. And man, this is a big old rabbit hole we could go down in so many ways on that one.
I'll simplify it a little bit. make it clear that you're using one thing for certification and you're doing something else for education. We fail everybody when we think that certification is going to educate or that education is going to certify. So you have two different things. You got institutional knowledge, how your department does business, and then you have global certification. So, man, if you're using the textbooks for your promotional exam, man, that's what you got to do. But when that person hits the streets, prepare them for the environment that they're going to be working in, and take care of them in that manner. So, you know, if you're testing off a department pump charge, then stick with that. Don't pollute it with a textbook.
Yeah.
If you're going to test with textbooks, then stick to those. So I think that takes an aggressive training division. It takes an awareness of what content you're working with. And if you don't have those resources, reach out. And there's plenty of shared information as far as internal engineers academies versus promotional exams. So, and I think today's world, one of the even better, I wrote it down because a lot of guys were asking about it, but there's places like Firefighter Depot that do flow meter rental programs. You can check out a full-on flow meter, electronic pitot gauge, inline gauges. If you're going to do an engineer program or something like that, run the promotional exam, but then do a hands-on week where they can actually see the water moving through the hose. They can see the impacts of elevation. They can see the impacts of adapters and appliances. And that's the best way to show people, is when they can see it in the real world. So if I were a training guy out there, man, just go ahead and rent one of these kits, get everybody together and take them through a process that is out of the textbook. I think we become too reliant on a two-dimensional means of education. We have to put the real world in their hands.
Jerry, you want to jump in a little bit about some of the resources we can offer out there?
Yeah, I will, because there's been a lot of those sidebars. You know, there's companies like Brian that talk about it. We have a couple of programs because, and this is something that's done with a very high frequency. If you reach out to one of our dealers or one of our regional people, we have demo equipment that we're willing to loan out. So you'll work with a dealer or one of our people to kind of notch down to the area of your objective, and then we can send you some equipment to support that in testing. So it comes to you, use it for 30 days. You can fight fires with it. You can do whatever you want with it. We would encourage that, but get your hands on it. And that's not something you want to do as your first step. Don't call somebody and say, hey, give me one of everything you make. Right. So put some effort into your objectives. Identify what your target flows are. When you start the dialogue with somebody, please try and have a good understanding of what equipment you currently use and have, so that you can draw some comparisons to that. So we do that. That can be done directly through us or through any of our distributors and dealers. You just have to reach out to them. And really that approach gives you some resources that the average person doesn't have. Obviously the equipment, but with that, especially on a larger profile thing, you're going to get somebody with a pretty deep amount of subject matter expertise in what we're talking about too, which is a nice asset. From the hands-on perspective, most of the guys, if you've ever been to any of the hot drills across the country that we're involved with, we supply a lot of equipment there, so you can get your hands on it that way as well. But if you're looking to do an in-depth evaluation at your own fire department, it would not be a bad idea to partner up with somebody that would have access to that type of equipment. So we realize it's expensive, and we're more than willing to put it into your hands, especially for the test and evaluation period, with no exchange of money.
Cool. Well, that might be a good part here to kind of start winding this thing down. But before we do that, we typically try to hit up our guests and see what you guys are up to, right? So, Eric, recent minted captain of Engine 23 in the city of Denver. We're missing FDIC, so otherwise you'd be there teaching. But what's shaking on your end other than seeing you at the ATROC conference?
Oh boy. It's interesting times right now, to say the least, with everything going on. So working hard to just do the best we can to keep the focus on remembering that we still go to fires. We train for fires. We get fires. Had 2 fires, a fire each last shift that we've had. So we've been lucky in that regard because it helps keep that focus off of everything else that's going on. The guys climbing into the Tyvek suits and the N95s and P100s and all that stuff. Instead of talking about numbers, I'm much happier to talk about GPMs and flows.
Yeah. We've gone from SM20s to N95s. It's just letters and numbers. Just together. Cool, man. And then Brush was a big announcement hitting the streets this week that you will be doing the keynote at the Firehouse World in Nashville in July, right? So tip of the cap to you on that. Cheers, congrats. Hope it doesn't suck. I think they'll probably be pretty good. No, but you and where else can we find you online? You want to talk a little bit about that and Fire by Trade and whatnot?
Yeah, man. I mean, I've always loved training. I've always loved being a part of all these different things. I found myself now in a role of a training chief. So it's like I've been preparing my whole life for this, or professional life for this position. So I've really tried to focus on that. This COVID event has thrown us off from our normal training mojo. So trying to get back into that. My primary job is the firefighters at Midwest City Fire and preparing them and keeping them in the game. And really that's my focus. I wish we could all be at FDIC. There was some guys that were going to go to that. We had a lot of training scheduled, but right now, like Eric was saying, we got to keep the morale up. We got to keep the mission in front of people's minds, and only the fire department's going to fire. So we want to get back to that with the weather turning and focus there. Hopefully, Firehouse Expo in Nashville is something that we can finally all get back together. I know a lot of us aren't used to meeting remotely. We're used to working together on drill grounds and stuff, and we're looking forward to getting back to that. But if we got to sacrifice one more event for the safety of everybody else, then we roll through that. That's what we're here for, is other people and not ourselves. So we'll just keep grinding, man.
That's it, man. Love you guys. Thanks so much for hanging with us. We will, for the questions that we didn't get to, we will try to pop up on Facebook and get them answered. If you missed part of this, if you want to tell somebody about it, about 24 hours from now, we'll be on the Elkhart Brass YouTube and Vimeo channels. So you'll watch part of your next day at work or whatever it might be. So again, we really want to thank Brian and Eric for hanging in there with us tonight, going deep and going late on this thing. And then the last nugget here, just some resources. I'm going to take these guys off the screen real quick. Thanks, guys.
See you, man.
Hold on one second. Look, I look like the Queen video. My lighting's gone crap here tonight. Again, remember Brass Tacks Hard Facts. You can get everything there. BrassTacksHardFacts.com. All the episodes are listed and sorted by category. If you can't get us there, ElkhartBrass.com. Has all of our information, technical info. You can find us on any of the socials. I'm really disappointed. I've been talking a lot about our TikTok page the last couple of weeks, and we only got like 2 extra followers. So I know by now you have found the end of the internet and you've made a TikTok profile. So come check us out there. And then lastly, Elkhart Brass is part of the Safe Fleet group. So our fire, EMS, and industrial group, that's made up of FRC, Foam Pro, us, Elkhart Brass, and ROM. So check out safefleet.net/FEI. That's the landing page that gets you to all the brands. If you're speccing out a rig, we got some quality brands that are probably on your fire truck now. So come check out and see what's new. Again, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you all next week.